So the US launched a war on terror in Colombia following 9/11. Remember, I said that Plan Colombia had to focus on coca growing regions because it was a counter-narcotics, and therefore they couldn't use it to defend oil interests in Arauca, namely Occidentals, or BPs in Casanare. Well, under the war on terror, now they could. In 2002, US provided $99 million in counter-terrorism aid on top of the Plan Colombia aid. They deployed US Army Special Forces troops to Arauca to help train the Colombian 18th Brigade to protect the pipeline and Occidental's oil facilities. They also lifted conditions on Plan Colombia aid, and this is a huge one. This is where the war on drugs and the war on terror got completely merged. Conditions on Plan Colombia aid meant that the 60-odd helicopters, Black Hawk and Huey helicopters, the 3,000 Colombian counter-narcotics troops formed and trained under Plan Colombia could only be used in counter-narcotics operations. After 9/11, all those conditions were lifted. Those helicopters, those troops can now be used anywhere in Colombia against the guerrillas in the war on terror. So now, all this aid can be used to protect oil interests anywhere, mining interests anywhere in Colombia. And they've been used in Arauca. That's a US Army Special Forces soldier in Arauca. This is a photo I took of a US Army Special Forces soldier teaching a counterinsurgency class to a unit of the 18th Brigade. 18th Brigade soldiers. The 18th Brigade, these are right-wing paramilitaries. The 18th Brigade has a horrendous history of links with the right-wing paramilitaries. The same troops that the US Special Forces were living on the base with two bases with 18th Brigade soldiers, training them. At the same time, the 18th Brigade is working with paramilitary death squads. Which raises questions, is it a war on terror or a war of terror in Colombia with regard to US military aid, Plan Colombia? While these are just a handful of human rights violations perpetrated by the 18th Brigade, while the US Army Special Forces were based with them. In April 2003, soldiers from the US-trained 18th Brigade and paramilitaries invaded an indigenous reserve in Arauca. 2 indigenous women were killed in the operation, one of whom was pregnant. She had a fetus cut out of her stomach. 3 other indigenous women were raped and more than 800 forcibly displaced. On August 21, 2003, soldiers arrested 42 trade unionists, social activists, and human rights workers in Saravena, took them back to the army base on the outskirts of Saravena, where the US Army Special Forces were based, charged them all with terrorism. In October 2003, soldiers arrested 25 opposition politicians in Arauca 1 week before local elections. On August 6, 2004, soldiers raided the home of 3 unionists in Saravena, dragged them out of bed and executed them, and then returned to their base a mile away where the US Army Special Forces were living. These are just a handful of the human rights abuses by the 18th Brigade while they were living and being trained by the US Army Special Forces. Multinationals and human rights, you cannot operate in Colombia's rural regions as a mining company, as a banana company, as an oil company, without receiving security from at least the Colombian military, if not the paramilitaries, to protect your operations from the guerrillas. All these companies, all oil companies, all mining companies in Colombia have military bases on their property. They provide transportation and fuel to the military, helicopters, company helicopters to transport soldiers on counter-insurgency operations. Oil company helicopters, mining company helicopters, vehicles. They are directly engaged with the Colombian military and in the war in Colombia. And there's a lot of evidence coming out that they are also directly engaged with the right-wing paramilitaries. Chiquita just last year pled guilty to providing $1.7 million in funding to AUC terrorists. Chiquita pled guilty in US federal court. That's an admitted fact that they paid right-wing paramilitary groups on the US terrorist list. Occidental Petroleum is currently in court in the US defending itself against working with the army to bomb the village of Santo Domingo in Arauca. where 18 civilians, 7 of them children, were killed. Drummond Mining has been in court in the US, the case is now under appeal, accused of aiding and abetting paramilitaries in the killing of 3 union leaders from their mine. So there's a lot of links, definitive links between companies and the military, and a lot of alleged links and some proven with between companies and the paramilitaries. So quickly in conclusion here, the human rights situation. President Alvaro Uribe's democratic security policy has dramatically reduced kidnappings and criminal murders in Colombia. Political murders have not fallen to the same degree that criminal murders have, crime in the urban areas. During President Uribe's first term in office, 2002 to 2006, the percentage of the country's human rights violations directly perpetrated by state agents increased from 17% to 56%. So we're talking about private corporations, Canadian companies, US companies, working directly with a military that is receiving US military aid to protect their operations, and it is a military whose role in human rights abuses has increased dramatically under President Uribe. 56% of human rights abuses now, according to CINEP, a Bogota-based think tank, are committed by the state security forces. Literal numbers, actual numbers of violations of international humanitarian law, more than double. So in overall numbers and in percentage of violations, the state's direct role has increased dramatically. And this is how the security conditions are being implemented in rural Colombia to allow for the economic boom that we hear about in Colombia, in foreign investment. The human rights situation, this is the breakdown, according to CINEP this year, of 2006, of who was responsible for violations of international humanitarian law. By far and away now it's the state forces. It used to be the paramilitaries. It's now the Colombian state directly. This is the government we're talking about engaging in a free trade agreement with. Foreign oil companies, quickly to go over. You can, again, just to review, the huge advantage now, investment advantage for foreign oil companies. As the resources, Colombia's resources have just been handed over to multinational companies in return, basically, for military aid and bailouts. I interviewed Stephen Benedetti, a Petrobank representative from Bogota. He said the company is excited about the new contract rules. That's not surprising. He said, we believe there's a big prize in Putumayo, and that's the estimated 1.1 billion barrels of oil in the Orido field, of which 80% remains untouched because there hasn't been security to access it. Now there is. Petrominerales is the subsidiary of Petrobank in Colombia, and they just announced yesterday that their profits increased the first quarter this year by 1,129% over last year. The Colombian profits. That was just announced yesterday. And Benedetti told me we believe the benefits outweigh the risk. Now he's sitting in a very plush, comfortable North Bogota office building telling me this. You go down to Putumayo, in Orito, you look at the oil facility. I don't know how many of you have read Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude, where he talks about the fruit company there in Macondo. But you stand, I stood here, I took this photo. This is the recreation facility for the oil workers. Nice in-ground swimming pool, slide, there's barbecues all over the place, picnic tables, a banquet hall. It's beautiful. It's also protected like a fortress. Only the oil workers are allowed in there. The villagers in Orito, who are sitting on top of all this oil, if you were to turn around, just literally do a 180 and look across the street, that's what you'll see. That is how the average campesino in Orito lives. The oil wealth is not benefiting the Colombian people. And there's one peasant, one campesino told me, everyone knows the conflict in the Middle East is because of oil, and Colombia's problems are no different. Maybe the coca is going, but there's still oil. And if there's oil, then the armed groups won't leave because they are interested in places where there is money and power. In other words, all this booming economy, this investment that is going on, and that we want to implement a free trade agreement to further intensify investment. And Canada's main interest is the extractive industries in Colombia. It is all contributing to intensifying the conflict in Colombia. It's not diminishing the conflict in Colombia, it's intensifying the conflict.